Exodus 18 addresses a family reunion of sorts. You will see as we go through the text that Moses had previously sent away his wife Zipporah and their 2 children, their 2 boys. And today is the account of them coming back together again. So we're going to talk a little bit about what preempted the separation, what caused that, and also about how things were when they came back together, what happened at this family reunion. Will you stand with me for the reading of God's Word? Didn't give you long to sit, did I? This is Exodus chapter 18. We'll begin in verse 1. Now Jethro, Reuel, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that the Lord had done for Moses and for Israel his people, and that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Verse 2 says, Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Moses' wife Zipporah, after he had sent her away from Egypt, along with her two sons, of whom was named Gershom, stranger, for Moses had said, I had been a stranger in a strange land. The name of the other son was Eleazar, my God is my help. For Moses said, the God of my father was my help, and he rescued me from the sword of Pharaoh. Verse 5, Then Jethro, his father-in-law, came with Moses' sons and his wife to join Moses in the wilderness, where he was camped in the mountain of God, that is, Mount Sinai in Horeb. Verse 8 says, He sent a message to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons who are with her. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down in respect and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being and went into the tent. Verse 8 says, Moses told his father-in-law about all the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for the Israel's sake, and about all the hardship that had happened during the journey, and how the Lord rescued them. Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done to Israel, that he had rescued them from the hand of the Egyptians. Verse 10 says, Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord who has rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who has rescued the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. Indeed, was proven when they acted insolently toward Israel, and the Lord showed himself infinitely superior to all their gods. Last verse, verse 12 says, Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. Father, we pray that you take these words and that you make them clear to our hearts and minds. And Lord, that you teach us and grow us. But more importantly, Father, that you shape us into your image, that you draw us closer to you than we've ever been before. It's in Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. You may be seated. So this passage, if you look at your horizon, I apologize because we ran short on those, so if you need to share, or if you see somebody around you that doesn't have one, and you have 2 or whatever, please share. You'll see it breaks down into Jethro bringing his family, Jethro having this meeting with Moses, and then Jethro praising Yahweh. Let's start at the beginning. Jethro brings his family. Look at verse 1 and we'll see the report. It says, Now Jethro, Reuel, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law. Now this is a long description for one guy, for one person, right? They call him Jethro. Jethro is his formal title that means he's a priest. Okay, so that's his official title. Reuel, which in my Bible is in parentheses, you may not see that in yours, but Reuel is his personal name. So on a friendship level or on a personal level, he'd be Reuel. On an official level, he'd be Jethro. Okay? He's also referred to as mother-in-law, or the father-in-law of Moses. You know, Moses' father-in-law. Moses' father-in-law. That happens 8 times in 12 verses. So, for some reason, the writer of Exodus, which is Moses, chose to narrate, or chose to, by under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, to make it clear this is a familial relationship. In other words, he is his father-in-law. Okay? So, now it says he's not here, but in other places, he's a priest of Midian. Now what that means is he is this spiritual leader for the Midianites. Now what had just happened in Exodus chapter 17 is there was this big battle between the Israelites and the Amalekites. The Israelites defeat the Amalekites. The Amalekites, I'll try not to get you lost in all the ites. The Amalekites and the Midianites were closely related. So I don't believe the Midianites wanted to start a war with Israel, because Israel's 2 million strong at this point, and it's a pretty impressive force. Now, they're not battle-hardened yet, but they're still big in numbers, so they're not wanting to itch to start a fight with the Israelites. So this priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, ends up making this journey to go see Moses. Okay, so let's look at how that came to pass. It says, verse 2 says, Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Moses' wife Zipporah after he had sent her away from Egypt. Now, so where is Zipporah? She's with Dad. Why is she with Dad? Because remember, take your Bible, flip back to Exodus chapter 4. We know that she left with Moses. So if she left with Moses, how'd she end up being back with Dad? In Exodus chapter 4, look at verse 20. Verse 20 says, And Moses took his wife Zipporah and her sons Gershom and Eleazar, and seated them on donkeys, and returned to the land of Egypt. Moses also took the staff of God in his hand. So in Exodus chapter 4, verse 20, you see Moses loading up his family and making this trek to Egypt. He had just received this divine call from the Lord at the burning bush. This fire moves from the bush into Moses' heart. He catches fire for God and decides, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to bow and obeisance to the Lord, and I'm going to go serve him, and I'm going to go confront Pharaoh, and that's going to facilitate the release of the Israelites. So he loads up Zipporah and her 2 boys and takes them with her. So what happened? Anybody know? Something did.
Pharaoh probably threatened the lives of Zipporah and the kids.
That's one theory. What Eric said was that Pharaoh may have threatened the lives of Zipporah and the kids. That's true. If Zipporah and the children made it all the way to Egypt, then they very likely were in some kind of danger, because Pharaoh would have went after them. What else? There's one other theory. Yes, ma'am?
She was, she was required to circumcise her 2 sons in the wilderness, and she was not happy about that.
She was not. She was required to circumcise at least one of them. Look at, if you're still in Exodus chapter 4, skip down to verse 24. Just so you understand what's happening here. I want you to, it's important for me that you learn, not just so you have some good knowledge of the Bible. I want you to have the knowledge of the Bible, but I want, if you understand really where these things are coming from and how all these pieces fit together, you see the majesty of God more clearly than you ever could if there's confusion in your mind. Does that make sense? So that's the reason why we spend so much time training, actually getting you to take these concepts, to learn them, and then to actually live them out in your lives. So that's the importance of it. Look at verse 24. This is the event that Ellen just referred to. This is Exodus 4:24. Now it happened at the lodging place that the Lord met Moses and sought to kill him, making him deathly ill because he had not circumcised one of his sons. Verse 25 says, Then Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off the foreskin of her son, and threw it at Moses' feet and said, Indeed, you're a husband of blood to me. Verse 26 says, So he let Moses alone to recover. At that time Zipporah said, You are a husband of blood because of the circumcision. So, now go back to Exodus 18, sorry. So, here's what had happened. So in this trip, Moses had been commanded all the way back, just make a note of this, in Genesis chapter 17, I think along verse 9 or thereabouts, but Genesis chapter 17, Abraham had been commanded to circumcise their children. They were given this clear directive. That circumcision united them as an Israelite. It brought them together. That was their covenant. That was their requirement, to be circumcised. Well, for whatever reason, the Bible doesn't tell us, so we won't speculate, Moses did not do this to at least one of his children. He has two, Gershom and Eleazar. Gershom means I was born in a strange land. That's, symbolizing his time in Midian. And Eleazar means God is my help, or God is my presence, is what Eleazar means, symbolizing the future hope that rests in the family. So one of these two boys were not circumcised. And so here comes Moses riding in to face Pharaoh, the most terrifying force on the planet, representing Jehovah God. And as he's representing him, he has not kept the most basic covenant that's required by God. The most basic thing. So this fire burns up in the Lord and Yahweh, and the Bible says he sought to kill him, which probably means he made Moses deathly sick by some form of means. I mean, he just went after Moses. Now, if he wanted to wipe him out, he could have done that. Okay? He could, in other words, God definitely could have killed Moses if he wanted to. The point is, he didn't want to, or else he would have. All right? So what he does at this point is, evidently there had been some strife between Zipporah and Moses about what to do with this circumcision deal. Zipporah was a Midianite. She was a pagan. She was raised underneath a pagan priest, okay, which worshipped all these different gods. So to her, circumcision was completely a million miles from her thought process. She didn't understand it. She didn't like it. She didn't like pledging allegiance to one God. That seemed simplistic, seemed to be ruling out too many options. She liked worshiping all the gods of Midian. So she didn't want to do this, right? So there had been conflict. Moses saying, we've got to do it. Zipporah saying, we can't do it. Husband and wife ever have disagreements? What about, you ever have disagreements about the kiddos? About the children? Jeez. So when you have these disagreements about the kids, right? So here's Zipporah and Moses. There's this big disagreement. They're both probably pretty strong individuals. Moses, we know, is a rockhead. Okay? Moses is a strong, Moses was one of the guys you would not have pushed around. Okay? Zipporah, she was raised in elegance. She was raised as a priest, right? Or a priestess. She was raised in a very royal household. She was respected in her community. So she probably had her nose up in the air too. So you've got two very strong individuals coming at each other. So what ends up happening is Zipporah, to save his life, because at this point in time, Moses is probably not capable of doing the circumcision. He's probably gravely ill. To save his life, she takes a stone and she circumcises her son. And she is so angry about doing this that she takes the foreskin and throws it at the feet of Moses and yells at him. Right? So, some people believe, now the reason I'm going to tell it to you this way is because it's not definitive. The Bible doesn't tell us. But some people believe that at that point in time, that Moses sent her away. That this caused such a rift in their family that he said, you take you and the boys and you go back to daddy. Okay? Other people believe that just after this meeting, Moses met with Aaron, his brother. And Aaron said, you've got a Midianite wife? What are you thinking? You're an Israelite. Why are you doing this? Right? And so Aaron counseled Moses to send her back. Other people thought what Eric mentioned earlier, which is she arrived at Egypt with Moses, but the danger was so great at some point in time with the plagues and everything that's happening in Egypt that Moses sent her home for her protection. So we don't know which of these three options it is. But she was sent home early, and it wasn't on great terms, probably. Okay? Now go back to Exodus, not Ephesians, 18. So it says, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Moses' wife Zipporah after he had sent her away from Egypt. Verse 3 says, along with her two sons. Notice it refers there to her two sons. Now it's going to change in verse 5. But in verse 3 it says, along with her two sons, of whom was named Gershom, stranger, and for Moses said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And verse 4 says, the other son was named Eleazar, my God is my help. As Moses had said, for the God of my father was my help, and he rescued me from the sword of Pharaoh. Now, it's significant that these two boys' names are brought out. Now, remember, in Bible naming, especially in the Old Testament, these names carry great meaning. These names would be prayed about. There would be some leadership from the Lord. They would determine a name based upon whatever they thought the Lord's direction for that child was. Write down Proverbs 22:6, I think. I may be wrong about that reference. My brain's not working 100%, y'all, but train up a child in the way he should go when he's old, he'll not depart from it. That passage, it's Proverbs 22 something. But anyway, as they were planning or preparing this child's way, his path was laid out before him. Part of that path was his name. So, a carpenter would be called something close to the carpenter. Someone who worked with steel or craftsmen of whatever type, they would be, following the family lineage, they would be named along that line. And if God gave them some special direction for that child, they would have that direction built into their name. So their name then became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their name actually meant something. So Gershom, that meant I was a stranger in a foreign land. Right? That's what Moses was when he was in Midian. When you look at Eliezer, it meant God is my presence, or God is my help, that God had helped him. So these two names having prominence is giving you a picture of Moses' life. You with me? Say, All right, look at verse 5. Then Jethro, his father-in-law, again, you see his father-in-law, came with Moses' sons. Now it's Moses' sons all of a sudden. And his wife to join Moses in the wilderness, where he was camped at the mountain of God, that is Mount Sinai in Horeb. Okay, so a quick question, just to kind of put this into context. How in the world would, first of all, the priest, what's his name? Jethro. How would Jethro hear all the things that were happening in Egypt? Sorry. Mark's like, you forgot the guy's name. How would Jethro hear of all the things happening in Egypt with Israel? I mean, did word get around back then? I mean, they didn't have CNN, right?
Spies.
Say again?
Spies.
Well, they had people, they had caravans, they had folks that were traders, merchants that were going up and down these trade routes. And so you can imagine if you were Jethro, I'll get it right here in a second. If you were Jethro, you would be anxious to hear of anything happening with Moses and the Israelites, right? This is your son-in-law, so you'd be anxious to hear what was happening with him. And of course, Zipporah wants to know what's going on with her husband. So they'd be anxious for these reports that would come back from Egypt. So when they're hearing these majestic things, all the things that the Lord is doing, Egypt punishing Israel, God delivering Egypt, punishment, deliverance, punishment, miracle, right? So they would hear of all these things and must have been blown away by all that was happening. So that was my first question. How did they know? Second question, how did he know where Moses was going to be and that Moses would even meet him? Because, several months at least have passed, maybe a year has passed. So how would he know?
It was just a battle with the Amalekites, and people would be talking about that.
The Amalekites is part of the puzzle. They had just fought the Amalekites. How else would he know?
That's where Moses was before, like previously, at the burning bush at Mount Horeb.
It's very insightful, Eric. That's exactly right. That's the last significant place where Moses was. This is the place of the burning bush. This is the place of the mountain of God, right? This is also the place where his father-in-law had dispatched him early on in their relationship to guard the flocks. This mountain of God. So that's the second theory. A third theory is maybe it was prearranged. Maybe Moses sent word to Jethro, I'm going to the mountain of God. I'll be there in a week or whatever the time frame was. Meet me there. Bring my family. That's a possibility as well. So they end up meeting up at this mountain of God. Now, look at verse 6. So you saw Jethro brings the family. Now Jethro meets Moses. Verse 6 says, he sent a message to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons who are with her. Why did he send that message?
To let them know that they were all still alive.
Okay. we just ride into Moses' encampment?
Wanted to make sure it was okay to bring the wife and kids.
Maybe.
The formality.
Could be a formal process. Remember what had just happened. They had just fought the Amalekites. So the Israelites at this point in time would be in full battle array, right? They would be in defensive mode. They would be their radar would be sharply dialed in to see if there's anybody coming. So some group of Midianites, not Israelites, but a group of Midianites riding into the camp would have been a very dangerous thing. Okay, you would have had Israelite warriors coming down on you like thunder. So it probably would have been a mistake. Secondly, it would have been disrespectful. For as far as their customs were concerned, Moses by this time was a great leader. Now this is early on in his career as God's servant, but he was already respected as a great leader. So just to say, hey, I'm having a meeting with you, I'm coming in, would have been disrespectful. You didn't even do that when you went to see the king, right? You would always send a servant or someone would go in to say, so-and-so is here to meet you. Will you see them? And they would say yes or no. So for those reasons, maybe for the reasons that we're not sure of how Moses sent his family back home. So maybe for those reasons, Eliezer said, or Jethro says, by the way, I've got your wife and kids. They're with me. But for whatever reason, he makes this formal announcement that they're coming. Okay, verse 7 says, so Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. Now look what Moses does. He does 5 things. Just jot down a letter or word for all these things. Number 1, it says he went out to meet him. Okay, so that's a sign of respect. He goes out to meet him. Number 2, he bowed down in respect. Now, part of the Middle Eastern custom at the time, and still today for many, is to take your body and you bow your entire body down to the ground to where your forehead touches the ground. It's a sign of respect. So you would bow all the way down to the ground. He does this to Jethro. Now remember, Moses is a great leader of an amazing nation. So what God is growing into this fantastic nation. And Moses, as this great leader, bows down to the ground to Jethro. Look at the next thing that happens. He gets up from his feet and he kisses him. Now again, this is not unusual for Middle Eastern custom. In fact, it still happens today. That's why in the New Testament, Paul admonished folks to greet one another with a holy kiss. It was a greeting back in those days. So he kisses him. Then the 4th thing you see is they asked about each other and their well-being. And then the 5th thing, they went into the tent. So you see this whole interaction happening now. It may hit you, well, where is Zipporah in all this? Where's she at? So Moses and Jethro have this meeting, but there's no mention of his wife. I mean, wouldn't you think that they would want to have this big, happy reunion, the wife and Moses, and, can you picture the scene, like the sun is setting against the ocean, and here's the husband running slowly in slow motion, and here's the wife running toward him, her veil, throwing it back in the wind. This very melodramatic, union. That didn't happen. Well, there was probably some kind of reunion, but it's not mentioned in text. It's not typically the style. Remember, this was a patriarchal society. Men ran this society. So women were mentioned far less and took less roles of prominence, typically speaking, than the men did. So that's why she's not mentioned. Then look at verse 8. It says, Moses told her father-in-law about all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh, number 1, and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about number 2, all the hardship that had happened during the journey, and number 3, how the Lord had rescued them. Okay? So Moses sits down with Jethro, tells him all these things that have happened, and then here's Jethro's response. Look at verse 9. It says, Jethro rejoiced over all the good things that the Lord had done to Israel, number 1, and that he had rescued them from the hand of the Egyptians. Then we go into Jethro praising Yahweh. Look at verse 10. Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, number 2, who has rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who has, number 3, rescued the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. So here's what happened. Moses mentions 3 different things. In his prayer response, Jethro comes back with 3 responses in his prayer as a praise to Yahweh. So picture this. You've got this Midianite priest, someone who's not educated in monotheism or one God. He's not educated in Yahweh. He's heard of Yahweh. In fact, he's a little impressed with Yahweh because he's heard about all these amazing things that Yahweh's done to Egypt. But he's not familiar with their customs. So here you've got the #1 prophet of Israel. Imagine this. The #1 prophet of Israel, you've got this Midianite priest that comes into his presence and begins leading worship. Pretty impressive, isn't it? Now, prior to this time, I don't believe that Jethro is a believer. Now, that's between Jethro and God, right? Only them two know. But it doesn't appear that he was a believer. It appears that he was a pagan. He was very religious, but not a believer in Yahweh. So at some point in time, through this process of Moses sharing all the amazing things that God had done, this priest, this pagan priest, is going to be converted. You'll see this happening before your eyes. Look at verse 10. Again, he says, he rescued the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. In verse 11, now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. So he's saying, now I know he's greater than all the gods. All what gods? All the ones he had professed. But what gods in particular do you think he would be dialed into? The Egyptian gods, right? Because he had seen and heard about all these Egyptian gods. So he's thinking, all these Egyptian gods come up, and here's this one God, Yahweh, this singular God. It was weird, because they worshipped a pantheon, right? They worshipped all these gods in unison. The sun god, and the moon god, and the Nile, and all these different things that they worshipped. Most of which were related to nature or things. But then there's this one God that comes on the scene and wipes them all out, defeats them all. So he's pretty impressed by it. But then he says, now I know that the Lord is greater. Now that word Lord, how is that written in your Bible? All caps. You know why it's in all caps? You know what that means when you see L-O-R-D in all caps versus L-O-R-D not in all caps? Or G-O-D? Yeah. Jermosh. Jehovah. For us, Yahweh. So he's speaking of Yahweh. Now, the difference between Yahweh and the other God he refers to, G-O-D, which is Elohim. The difference between those two is Elohim is a plurality of God that's somewhat distant. Yahweh is a personal God that's very, very close. That's the difference between the two. That's how in Genesis it goes from Elohim to Yahweh. There's a transition that happens in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. He becomes this faraway, distant, massive God to this very close, personal God. This seems to indicate that this is the point that Jethro's heart is regenerated. That he sees God as a personal God. He is my God. So you see this amazing event that takes place, probably surrounding some family conflict. So take heart. If there's conflict in your family, great things can come from it. Okay, let's finish up. He says, now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. Indeed, was proven when they acted so insolently toward Israel, and the Lord showed himself infinitely superior to all their gods. Verse 12. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, in case we forgot, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel and to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. So this is Jethro praising Yahweh. Now, what they do is they come together after this praise meeting that this Midianite priest leads in the presence of an Israelite prophet, the greatest prophet of all time. So they, after this time of praise, they enter into this time of worship. Okay, so what they're doing here, Mark, is they bring food. It's a good key to worship. They bring food. And the food that they bring, now if you see in your notes on your horizon, I wrote down 2 words for you. One was olah and one was zebahim. Olah means a burnt offering. A burnt offering is something that's given and the entire offering is consumed, is burned up to God. That's olah. Okay? This is not that word. This is zebahim. That word means part of it is burned up, the rest of it is divided up for the people to eat. So it was a time of worship. The first one is more severe and is not dealing with any kind of fellowship with God because they're afraid of God to a degree. That burnt offering is supposed to be a buffer between them and God. The second one, the one that we see here, Zebahim, that one is something that's given as an act of worship to God in recognition of who He is, but also fellowship of the people. Also bringing people together to fellowship around Him. So the closest thing to what we do today is Zebahim. We have some kind of offering that we raise up to God in our praise or in our sacrifice and our love and our devotion. We raise these things, Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. We raise up our bodies as living sacrifices to God. That sweet aroma that He receives from the sacrifice, us living our lives for Him. And then we spend that time in communion. We spend time getting closer to one another. By the way, we changed things up a little bit today. 31 minutes. Woo! We changed things up a little bit today. We're going to finish here shortly. Our corporate family worship time. When we're finished with our family worship time, we encourage you that you can hang out as long as you want to and talk, share prayer requests, get to know people. If there's folks here that you don't recognize, spend time getting to know them. So before you rush out the door, meet some people. Say hi. Get closer. Talk to folks about them, not about you. Always be others-minded. The more that you do that, because they're rarely going to get that when they leave these walls. Once they leave here, most people during most of their week is going to want to talk about themselves, not talk about others. That's my announcement. So they all come together with God, with Aaron, all the elders of Israel. They come with Moses' father-in-law, and they have this meal. So Moses brings all these people together. Actually, Jethro brings all these people together for this amazing meeting. And at this meeting, Moses is present, although he's not mentioned, he's assumed. Moses is present. Jethro is present. Aaron, Moses' brother, is present. He is the official priest of Israel. And then the elders are present. So all these people come together for this meeting. Now what's amazing about this is the first ever multi-denominational gathering. Right? Because you've got this Midianite that worships these other gods coming together with these Israelites that worship only one God, that worship Yahweh. So you've got them coming together, and the amazing thing is they come up together under the banner of Yahweh. In other words, when they saw the majesty of Yahweh, their differences kind of burned up. Their borders kind of disappeared. The distinctions went away. And so I'm thinking, how informative is this for us? I mean, how amazing. Because SkyPointe's strength has always been that we focus, or we attempt to invest to our human ability, to focus on the main thing. Not all these tangential issues that could be divisive and cultivate fractures and splits and all these other things. But we focus on the majesty of Jesus Christ. And see, if other people from other denominations or wherever, that's why there's so many different ones represented here today. There's everything here today. I know you guys have shared with me, so I know all your backgrounds, and there's a variety of backgrounds, some that would really surprise you. But all these different backgrounds can be brought together under the umbrella of the beauty and the majesty, the glory of Jesus Christ. It's a beautiful thing. It's an instructive thing for us. Okay, let's pray.